What does it mean to be a king? Is it respect, wisdom, birthright, or simply a possession of absolute dominating power? Regardless of what you think makes a king, Meruem and Sukuna seem to fit the bill. And with JJK ending and Hunter x Hunter kicking back off, I figured that there's no better time to talk about how these absolute monsters would fare against one another in a battle to the death. Meruem, the king of the Chimera Ants. Sukuna, the king of the Curses. Who is the one true king? In other words, today we'll be exploring and breaking down Meruem versus Sukuna. Before we get started, I think it's worth going over the stipulations and structure regarding this video. First, the forms we'll be using will be full power at full health for both. Now, this isn't really a question for Meruem, as we know his strongest form is the version of Meruem after he recovers from the Rose Bomb. Obviously, fully healthy would mean that he doesn't have the poison from the Rose Bomb affecting him like he did at that point in the story, so as I'll go over in a bit, he'll have all of the scaling and abilities he has in that form, including the ones he inherits from Yuppie and Poof, but he'll be at full health. As for Sukuna, the version of Sukuna we'll be using is Incarnated or True Form Sukuna from the Kashimo fight. Now, obviously, we have statements later on that inform us that he hasn't fully recovered from his battle with Gojo, but that should only be in regards to his domain, as his incarnation is stated to restore his body. For the sake of argument, we'll just say that the domain cooldown is removed so he can operate at full capacity in all regards from the start of the match. The stipulations for this battle will be standard, so each character will be fighting in character, but with the intent to kill their opponent. The winner will be determined by death or KO, and the fight will take place in a neutral battlefield, so let's just say the location will be where Meruem fought Netero. Finally, we will be using verse equalization, meaning that aura equals cursed energy. That way the power systems can interact with one another in the way that they would interact in their own respective universes. That said, now it's time to dig into the scaling. So for starters, we don't have a ton to go off of here, but we do have enough to, I think, properly scale Meruem, especially if we start from where he was when he fought Netero, as he is stated to be stronger than he was during that fight. So just how strong was Meruem when he fought the chairman? In terms of speed, Meruem is no joke. Pre-Rose Bomb Meruem is capable of taking on and reacting to Netero and his Bodhisattva statue strikes. While Meruem does state that Netero's strikes are faster than himself, these strikes are insanely fast. I know a lot of people don't like pixel calcs, but I do think it's important here, so we'll briefly get into the numbers to determine just how fast Netero's strikes are, and we can actually determine that fairly easily. You see, we're told that prior to getting his leg taken off, Netero is stated to have delivered several hundreds of thousands of blows to Meruem, with several typically being between 5 and 9. We can take a safe middle ground of 700,000 blows. But what time frame are we talking? Well, we know that after Netero gets his leg taken off, it's stated that the remainder of the battle took less than a minute. They exchange thousands of blows again, Netero gets his arm taken off, they exchange multiple sentences, Netero uses the zero hand, they chat some more, and then Netero uses the Rose Bomb. Now, there's no way to accurately quantify the difference in time between this part of the encounter and the time in the fight before Netero gets his leg taken, but I do think it's safe to say that putting it at less than 5 minutes should be fair based on the amount of chapters and panels, etc. that we actually see in that part of the fight. So if we say that he performs 700,000 strikes in 5 minutes, that gets us to 2,333 strikes per second, or 1 strike per every 0.0004 seconds. Since Netero is 5 foot 3 inches tall, his arm length should be about 2 feet, meaning that if he were to bring his arm from above his head across his body, like how the Bodhisattva statue does in this scan, it would likely be covering about 3 feet or 1 meter. This means that with a strike like this, he can cover about 1 meter in 0.0004 seconds, which gets us to a striking speed of about 2,500 meters per second, or just over Mach 7. Now that sounds super slow, and that's because it is. However, keep in mind, he's actually completing 2 movements in this time frame, bringing his hands together and then making the attack motion. So we can double that and get his striking speed to about Mach 14. Now that that's established, we do need to get into the weeds for just a second, but I promise you it's going to be really helpful. So most of you are Naruto fans, as that's what my channel is mainly based on, so most of you know that Susanos are faster than the user, but I'm not sure how many of you know the principle behind that, a principle that I call angular coverage. Essentially, if I, a 6-foot man, and Shaquille O'Neal, a 7-foot man, both put our right arms out to our sides, like the guy in the Leonardo da Vinci diagram, and then we moved our arms as fast as we can to the front-facing position, as if pointing at something in front of us, we would both have covered roughly a 90-degree angle, aka the angular coverage would be the same. However, if we complete this movement in the exact same amount of time, Shaq would technically be moving faster than me because his arm is longer, therefore requiring him to cover a greater physical distance, and speed is measured by distance over time. But we would do this while covering the same angular distance. Now scale that up to the Susanoo, and now you can see why the Susanoo is faster than the user. The same principle scales up in the Bodhisattva statue example. Since the Bodhisattva's arm, according to Pixelcalcs, is roughly 52 times larger than Netero's arm, it would be covering the same angular distance in the same amount of time, while covering 52 times the physical distance, making it 52 times faster than Netero's strikes. This puts the Bodhisattva strikes at Mach 728. Now, keep in mind, this is striking speed, not movement speed, but it is still blazingly fast. So now that we have that number, we can take a look at Meruem. He is just definitively outsped by these strikes, unable to do anything at all outside of just keeping constant pressure on Netero and awaiting an opening for Meruem to be able to tag Netero, which he is capable of doing faster than Netero can react, effectively a perception blitz. Since a perception blitz is generally regarded as being about 7 times the combat speed of the person being blitzed, the floor for Meruem's combat speed is at Mach 98, but I think we can do better than that. If we look closely in Meruem's fight with Netero, there is one moment that leads me to believe his combat speed is several times faster than this Mach 98 mark. Right before he takes Netero's arm, we can see this indicator on the Bodhisattva's arm indicating that Meruem must have leapt off of it. This means that he must have reacted to this strike, positioned his body to dodge it, and then landed on it without being tagged by it. This bare minimum makes his combat speed low relative to the Bodhisattva strike, but arguably gets his combat speed higher. For the sake of argument, let's just say it puts him right at the speed of the Bodhisattva striking speed, or Mach 728. Now we are talking. Since we have a solid metric to work from, I can now bring up the fact that he gets 3 times faster post-revival. This should be an overall stat boost by the nature of how he got this stat boost, meaning his combat speed should also go up to at least Mach 2174. This is fairly consistent as we have several calcs getting much weaker characters such as P2 who can't even react to his strikes to travel speeds of Mach 105 fairly comfortably. So that's where we'll have his combat speed for this matchup. I will say he may be able to get some of his abilities, specifically his transmutation abilities, to light speed as he can turn his Nen into photons, but we haven't really seen any combat applications of this, so it would be unfair to use. But what about his attack potency and durability? This is actually far more straightforward. Quickly, because these force outputs are so high, the force metric I'll be using is going to be in megatons, kilotons, and gigatons of TNT as opposed to joules, just because it's going to be a lot less verbose. Now, since Meruem would have survived the Rose Bomb explosion, even without help, not the poison, just the explosion, pre-revival he should be right at about 245 megatons, making him 7A or mountain level in terms of durability. Now that is the top end of his durability, but since he should also get a 3 times physical boost post-revival, he would be around 735 megatons or comfortably in the high mountain range in terms of his physical durability. Attack potency is actually about the same, unsurprisingly, although probably a little bit higher. Not only should his physical attack scale slightly above his own durability at minimum, since he can rip his own arm off, he's also casually able to produce mountain level feats such as this casual Rage Blast with his Nen Blasts. Keep in mind, Meruem should be able to enhance his physical attack potency and durability using things like Ko and Ryu with a maximum increase of 10x with Ko-amped punches and amping his durability in particular areas. This would get his physical attack potency and durability over 7 gigatons or comfortably in those island level ranges without much trouble. There There are some other abilities that I'll talk about later, but we do now have his scaling down. Speed, AP, durability, all that stuff. So it's now time to jump into Sukuna scaling. Before that though, if you are enjoying the video so far, or maybe have learned anything, make sure you like and subscribe. Unless you hate puppies. If you can look at this face right here and say you hate it, you don't want to save this thing, you know what, you don't deserve to be here. You should leave. So here's the thing. Sukuna scaling, along with all of JJK, is all over the place. Because JJK is super inconsistent in terms of scaling, you have to choose what you think is most consistent or best, and for the sake of this video, I'll be using a more middle ground conservative take. I won't be using FTL JJK or Mach 5 JJK, because A, I see some issues with both of those sides of the scaling meta, and B, this video would be super uninteresting if I went with either of those. So then, what is the middle ground interpretation of Sukuna's scaling? Like I said, you can highball Sukuna to FTL and you can lowball him to just a little bit over Mach 3, but the middle ground puts him just a few times over lightning speed. We get this from Sukuna scaling over Hikari to an unknown degree, with Hikari being able to react to and dodge Kashimo's lightning at close range. Because of the fact that Hikari seems to cover a greater distance than the lightning in question in the same amount of time, he's definitely faster than the lightning, if just by a little bit. The pixel calcs that I've seen have gotten this to roughly 3 times the speed of lightning, but this assumes that the lightning is in the middle of Hikari's face here. However, since this is 2D and not 3D, we don't really know exactly what side of Hikari's face the lightning is on in this frame, so we can't say that for certain. We do know that sorcerers can also detect the initial sparks of cursed energy attacks, granting most high-level sorcerers the ability to essentially aim dodge attacks that are faster than them, and that could be the case here. So if we take a conservative estimate here, we can safely say that Hikari is high relativistic to the speed of this lightning at worst. So then, just how fast is this lightning? Well, we know that Kashimo's attack works as a sure hit because he separates his cursed energy into positive and negative charges, attaching a positive charge to his opponent on contact, and then discharges the negative charge he possesses, which causes the lightning-like attack to occur, and also is what makes it a sure hit. This is actually how the downstroke of lightning works, with the clouds carrying the negative charge and the ground carrying the positive charge, so we can safely scale this to the lower end of lightning speed, or at most Mach 587. Because Sukuna should be faster than Hikari by a significant degree, I think it's fair to assign a blitz tier difference between the two. We do see him go relative with the likes of Maki, Yuta, and Yuji, with Yuta being compared to Hikari more than once, but we also see him outspeed all of them on multiple occasions, so I think it's fair to get Sukuna to roughly a blitz tier above this speed of lightning, putting him right at Mach 2348, making him marginally faster than the king of the Chimera Ants. But what about attack potency and durability? Well, first, I want to state that we cannot definitively scale characters to their domains. The reason for this is something called sandbox theory. For example, if you're playing in a video game, the environment can seem larger than it actually is. You can be traveling outward but run into an invisible barrier that stops you from continuing despite the apparent extension of the map outside of that area. That could be what's happening with Dagon's island-level domain. Thus, we can't say for certain that Sukuna's domain upscales from there, since it's difficult to actually calc the AP of Sukuna's domain by virtue of how it functions, and it's not necessarily a concentrated attack, but rather a series of unquantifiable slashes. I think the best way to scale Sukuna's maximum output would be by upscaling him from Gojo. In terms of force output, my Glorious King is actually sort of crazy, with the earthquake he caused from exiting the prison realm being calced to between 5 and 10 gigatons of force, getting him firmly into that 6C or island range as well. Since the ultimate technique for a sorcerer is their domain, I do think it's safe to assume that Sukuna's domain can safely scale here. However, his physical durability should be significantly below this. We know this because he required either domain amplification or cursed energy reinforcement to somewhat resist Gojo's hollow purple, which has been calced to around 500 kilotons or 7C, aka large town level. Now, Gojo's Hollow Purple does also seem to have atomization hacks via how it's described to function, but that probably is just in relation to the actual mass touching the target, not the explosion, which is what's calced here and what Sukuna took damage from. So that would reinforce the idea that Sukuna's physical durability is vaguely below large town level, but he is able to take attacks on this tier with only the loss of a couple of limbs. Another important thing to add is that some people will claim that true form Sukuna is physically superior to this version of Sukuna, but I would say that we don't really know, and I'd actually push back on that a little bit by saying that whenever he does go through his transformation, he's stated to be restored by it, not amplified by it. So it likely wouldn't drastically change this level of physical durability or physical attack potency, etc., etc. If you'd like to bring him up to 7B or small city level, that's fine, but we can't reasonably get him multiple tiers above where he was at because we just don't have anything to suggest that. Now, before we jump into the matchup, I think it's worth mentioning that some of you have probably been angrily typing and or yelling at your screens because I haven't brought up Yuki. So before we do that, let's jump into this. Some people will try to scale Sukuna to Planetary Plus by virtue of scaling over Yuki. Now, that's because she has an attack that is a black hole, essentially, that's able to destroy the entire planet. So him being stronger than her, he should be above that, right? Not exactly. She doesn't even scale to that black hole, so he can scale above her, but below the black hole attack that she has without any contradictions. Some people will say, well, he has more cursed energy than her, so he should be able to do XYZ, but that doesn't really matter because this is a Hax as opposed to some kind of crazy cursed energy output. So again, he can have better output than her, he can scale higher than her, but still be below the black hole because she is also. So just wanted to get that out there before moving on because I know somebody's going to bring it up. Now that we've established where our characters scale, I think we can break down how this fight goes. Quickly, let's take a look at the advantages that each character has over the other. Speed is close, but Sukuna does have the slight edge. Since there's no substantial gap, these two should be able to keep up with one another and tag each other without any issues. In terms of physical durability, Meruem has a clear edge, scaling all the way up to high mountain level fairly easily. Both Meruem and Sukuna do have regeneration, but I'd give Sukuna the regen edge because he verifiably has better regen feats. However, I don't think that that makes up the gap in the slightest, especially whenever you consider the fact that Meruem can actually amp his durability past this level. In terms of physical attack potency, Meruem should also have the advantage, as his physical durability scales higher than Sukuna's, and usually physical attack potency and durability are relative, although we do know that Meruem's physical attack potency scales above his physical durability. However, I do think this gap can be made up for with a Black Flash, as that 2.5 exponent increase would cause Sukuna to jump all the way up to the 6C tier, as he would jump from roughly 500 kilotons to 5.5 gigatons, making his Black Flash punches firmly island level. So while Meruem's base physical durability is below that, his aura enhanced durability would also be in that 6C tier, which would allow for the Black Flash from Sukuna to harm Meruem significantly in his base form, but they would be essentially relative in terms of attack potency and durability whenever Meruem's amping himself. In regards to their strongest attacks, I would say that Meruem's are probably his physical attacks, or at least the ones that we can definitively get the highest, as they do scale all the way up to island level. And even though he does this mountain level rage blast super casually, which leads me to believe that at full power it should be much higher than that, arguably into the high island level ranges, we can't really get it there for certain. So if you want to be a little generous, feel free to put it there. If not, it's like high mountain level. But with Sukuna, we have his domain, which also, as I said before, gets into those island level ranges. Now, one thing you guys may have noticed is I haven't brought up the world cutting slash. This does have infinite AP essentially because it slashes space. However, I don't think that that matters here because Sukuna can outspeed his own slash, and Meruem scales relative to Sukuna in speed, which means he would also be able to outspeed this same slash, meaning it's probably not going to matter in the battle. But all of this means that each of them, under the right circumstances, can in fact harm one another, with Meruem having an advantage of being able to produce these levels of force physically, while Sukuna requires his domain or getting lucky with a black flash in order to produce these high levels of output. Meruem does seem to have a distinct advantage, particularly early in the fight. But what about in terms of skill? I think it's impossible to prove who has the superior hand-to-hand skill, as there's no definitive way to show that. However, Sukuna's overwhelming experience and possession of an extra limb, as he has 2 extra arms and Meruem just has 1 tail, would allow for him to have the hand-to-hand advantage, if not for the fact that he physically scales too low to be able to resist Meruem's physical attacks effectively. Then we have intellect, which should be a distinct advantage for Meruem. Not that Sukuna's dumb, it's just Meruem's the smartest character in Hunter x Hunter, showcasing the ability to think hundreds and thousands of moves ahead, adapting to and analyzing even the most minute of patterns in mere moments. He also instantly picks up on how to utilize Poof and Yuppie's abilities even better than they could themselves. So I think it should be clear by now, more times than not, Meruem should take this. Not only should he be able to tag Sukuna because they're relative in terms of speed, he should win every physical clash they have due to having superior physical attack power and durability. Yes, Sukuna's regeneration and extra limbs would allow for him to overcome this disadvantage to some degree, but without a Black Flash, he cannot physically harm Meruem, and Meruem should be able to rip apart Sukuna's body with ease. This means that Sukuna would be forced to use his domain, assuming that he makes it that far into the fight, and it still may not even be enough to do the job, as Meruem's Nen enhancement techniques would allow for him to defend against the domain slashes effectively, minimizing damage similar to how the domain amplification works. Since Meruem's standard physical attacks should get him to a place high enough to where he can actually damage Sukuna with no problems, he could just pour 100% of his aura into defense, as we know that they can augment the percentage of aura they put into offense and defense, and then just with his base attack power beat up Sukuna in his own domain while basically tanking all of the slashes. Even if Sukuna decides to close the domain and use Fuga, the AP of this attack would essentially tickle Meruem, so it's kind of out of the question as a win con as well. Ultimately, the only real win condition here for Sukuna would be the world-cutting slash, but again, Meruem should be fast enough to dodge it with relative ease. Meanwhile, Meruem can utilize just base physical attacks, aura-enhanced physical attacks, aura blast, etc. to badly damage Sukuna, allowing for him to utilize his superior intellect and power output to end the fight quickly. Could I see a case in which Sukuna uses a binding vow to land a world-cutting slash, thus getting the W? Sure, given enough time. I also think, though, that with this form being able to augment his body in strange ways like Yuppie does, I think it's possible that a world-cutting slash wouldn't even put him down for a significant amount of time. However, in the scenario where he is able to use the world-cutting slash to decapitate Meruem, Sukuna could probably get the win. However, I think that the fight would end way before Sukuna realizes that he needs to do that. So, in the end, taking this fight mid-diff, Meruem stands alone as the one true king.